Let's start with Georgia Clemson. It'll be noon Eastern time on ABC. I'll be on the call alongside Sean McDonough and Molly McGrath. Should be awesome. This is a game that is featuring two teams that have combined to win 4 of the last 8 national championships. The only other national title for each program actually came in the 1980s. Georgia won it in 80. Clemson won it in 81. And these two teams used to play each other just about every year. So it's really cool to see them on the field. We saw it a couple of years ago, and it should be really exciting. Other big picture items in this game. It's only 3 active FBS head coaches who have won a national championship. That's the fewest, by the way, the fewest active coaches with an AP or coaches championship entering the season since 1942. Of course, Dabo Swinney has 2. Kirby Smart has 2. But are these two programs that are heading in different directions? There's some perception that they might be. Just based on how things have looked the last couple of years for Clemson and Georgia, people think one's on the way up, or is at very least at the top of the sport. Other people seem to think it's going in the wrong direction. I don't know if I agree with that, but over the last 3 years, Georgia has as many losses as they do national championships. They have 2 championships. They have 2 losses. Their only losses over that span came against Bama. So they've obviously done quite well. Clemson, by comparison, has lost 3 games in each of the last 3 seasons. They went 9-4 last year, and it's the first time that they won less than 10 games since 2010. The reason why people think it's not going so well for Clemson is because they have been slow to adopt the modern era of the sport. Clemson in 2023 and 2024 brought in 0 transfers. They are one of 4 FBS programs with that distinction. The other 3 are service academies, Air Force, Navy, and Army. They also have 0% total starts from Clemson players that have come from transfer portal. So that's obviously the lowest. Can't get lower than 0. But people think Georgia's like going into the portal. Georgia doesn't have that much of a differentiation in philosophy from Clemson. Just 12% of their starts come from the portal, which is 119th in the FBS. So both really lean into high school recruiting, but Clemson has not added the few pieces that Georgia has the last couple of years to kind of fortify their roster and maybe cover up some weak points. Doesn't mean that Clemson hasn't tried. They just haven't landed some of those players. Let's get down to the questions that will determine the outcome. Number 1, can Clemson's heavy pressure affect Carson Beck? Clemson blitzed on nearly half of their opponents' dropbacks last year. That was the 2nd highest rate in the sport. For those of you that had Western Kentucky as the most blitz-heavy team, congratulations. I didn't, but you did. Congratulations. Terrific stuff. That's the highest rate by Clemson since ESPN began tracking this 15 years ago. They also heated up quarterbacks on a pretty regular basis. They recorded pressures on nearly 40% of the dropbacks, which is among the top 10 to top 15 in the sport. So they can get after the quarterback. Here's the thing. Nobody gets the ball out faster than Carson Beck in the sport. He released it in under 2.4 seconds. He's one of 3 quarterbacks that did that last year, all 3 of which were at 2.38. That's number 1 in the sport. So Carson Beck sees it, he identifies it, and he takes advantage of it. Because when you blitz him, he wears you out. His numbers actually improve against the blitz. So blitzing him is not going to necessarily get you the W. What could get you the W, though, would be making a move in the pocket. Force him to shuffle his feet. Make him feel uncomfortable. It's a little bit like Tom Brady. When his feet are set, he's going to tear you apart. But when he moves, his QBR drops by 65 points. That's significant. His completion percentage drops from 77 to 49.2 when you make him move. Can you pressure Carson Beck? Clemson can. They have a chance of slowing down this offense. Let's go to number 2. Can Georgia beat man coverage? When you look at Georgia, they didn't see a lot of man last year. Last year, most of what you saw against Georgia was zone coverage, partly because they have such talented wideouts. And who the heck were you going to cover Brock Bowers with in man coverage? You didn't have a chance. So you had to zone it up, and they didn't see a lot of guys that would go up and challenge you. Beck was extremely efficient against zone, but against man, there really isn't enough of sample size to really acknowledge it. But they have great weapons. We know that. Dominic Lovett, the addition of Urosic from Stanford, the tight end transfer. Lawson Lucky at tight end is also healthy. So they have some guys that can beat you up in man, but can they do it consistently enough? Because that's what they're going to get from Clemson. Nobody plays more man than Clemson except for Purdue and Notre Dame. So pretty much everybody plays a lot of man, but no one plays quite as much as those three. Number 3, can Clemson run the football? I mean, Phil Maffa down the stretch became the featured back last year. He had never had more than 16 carries in the game before the Notre Dame game that last year. He had 36 that day. And then averaged over 23 carries a game the final 4 games of the regular season. Now, he lives between the tackles. He doesn't do a whole lot on the perimeter. His productivity drops considerably when you get him to the outside. He's a big body back that wants to keep his shoulders square and wants to get downhill A-gap to A-gap. Now, Georgia's run defense took quite a bit of step back last year. And people look at the numbers and say, well, they were still in the top 20 in the sport. Yeah, well, for a while there, from 19 to 22, they allowed 76 rushing yards a game. Last year, they allowed 113.6 rushing yards per game. So from a 4-year span, 2019 to 22, to last year, it was about a 40-yard gap per game. Another key area, too, is they allowed 1 full yard more per rush before contact, and they gave up an awful lot of yardage outside the tackles. They gave up over 5 yards of carry outside the tackles. That was 77th. And they gave up over 5 yards of carry on zone reads. That was 90th. So can Clemson run the football? And then finally, question number 4, can Clemson create big plays? Last year, they just didn't manufacture a whole lot. Just 46 plays that gained 20-plus yards. That was 98th in the sport. Just 9.9% of their completions went for 20-plus yards. That was 131st in the sport. Now, Klubnik didn't push the ball downfield, but they also didn't really have a deep arsenal of weapons at wide receiver because guys were beat up all throughout last year. Whether it was Antonio Williams or Cole Turner, they had a bunch of guys that were beat up. So that's something to be mindful of as well. We know Georgia's going to rush the quarterbacks. It's going to be hard to create plays on a regular basis, but when there are chances to be made downfield, you got to make them if you're going to beat the Georgia Bulldogs. A couple trends in the game. The under is 8-0 in Georgia season openers under Kirby Smart. That's since 2016. The under has hit in each of Clemson's last 4 season openers. So common sense would lead you to believe this is going to be a low-scoring game. This will be the 3rd time that Clemson is a double-digit underdog under Dabo Swinney and the 5th time he's an underdog of more than 7 points. They lost outright in each of the previous 4 instances, but they covered in 3 of the 4 instances. So a couple of the trends to think about. I will not be taking a side in this game because I'm on the call, but I hope you enjoy it there noon Eastern time on ABC.